Good morning and thank you all for joining us. Today's webinar, Chemical Resistance to Disinfectants, is brought to you by Eastman. Your presenters today are Kenneth Breeding, Dr. Yubia Liu, and Cynthia Lewis. Cynthia Lewis is a Market and Insight Strategy Manager at Eastman Chemical Company in Kingsport, Tennessee. She assumed this role in May of 2013. Lewis is responsible for providing market insights and strategy for the medical portfolio in Eastman's specialty plastic business. Joining Cynthia is Kenneth Breeding, Jr. Kenneth is a Sales Specification Associate for the specialty plastics business at Eastman Chemical Company, also based in Kingsport, Tennessee. He is responsible for working with medical OEMs, designers, and molders to drive innovation and new medical application sales development using Eastman specialty medical-grade polymers. Joining Kenneth is Dr. Yubia Liu. Dr. Liu is a medical application development representative and medical technology platform leader. In 2012, Dr. Liu joined Eastman Chemical Company as the medical application development representative, specializing in Triton copolyester applications in the medical device industry. My name is Trey McDonald with UL, and I'll be moderating today's event. Please send us your questions by typing them in the question box located on your screen. Our panelists will answer them at the end of the presentation. We are recording today's event and will send you a link by email when the slides have been posted to ulprospector.com. Now I'd like to turn the presentation over to Cynthia. Cynthia?
Thank you very much. We're really pleased to have all of you today with us. What we're going to be talking about is chemical resistance in the world of medical devices. The life of medical devices is being shortened, and the performance is being compromised by a variety of external forces in today's healthcare environment. We'll look at the pressure these forces exert on medical devices, focusing on healthcare-associated infections, which we will call HAIs, and the resulting use of aggressive disinfectants in hospitals and other healthcare settings. We'll take a look at the need for chemical resistance in both clear and opaque devices, and finally, the results of testing to evaluate the impact of common medical disinfectants on leading engineering polymers. And finally, at the end of this presentation, we will have an active question and answer session. Today's medical devices must measure up to many standards, with patient safety always being the ultimate goal. Medical devices do more for caregivers and patients with each innovation in medical and polymer science. They do more, they look better, they are lighter, they are easier to use. Devices are becoming more portable and come in contact with more people. And today's devices often are operated by patients as well as trained professionals. In addition to constant handling, devices must withstand frequent usage of aggressive disinfectants, disinfectant wipes, and sterilization as part of the increased emphasis on preventing HAIs. So far, we've mentioned the forces that put pressure on the outside of devices. Many devices also must withstand attack from within, from powerful cancer and oncology drugs and their carrier solvents. And of course, devices must stand up to this changing use environment cost effectively for the greatest lifetime value of each device. Before we talk more about HAIs, we want to define our terms. You'll see HAI used to refer to hospital-acquired infections, especially when talking about Medicare reimbursements implemented through the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS, as we'll see in our next slide. This interpretation speaks specifically about patient infections that are not present or incubating at the time of admission to the hospital. HAI is often used in a broader sense to stand for healthcare-associated infection, especially by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, the World Health Organization, WHO, and other organizations who want to include settings beyond inpatient acute care. This broader interpretation addresses healthcare workers as well as patients, and it includes outpatient settings such as ambulatory surgery centers and dialysis facilities. It includes long-term care settings such as nursing homes and rehabilitation centers, and it may even include home care usage. Naturally, the healthcare industry's biggest concern is that HAIs put patients at risk. But HAIs contribute significantly to higher medical costs by extending hospital stays and readmissions. And now HAIs cause reduced profitability to the hospitals, who are currently operating at a 1.5% profit margin. In 2009, CMS began refusing to pay for some readmissions resulting from HAIs. Beginning in 2012, as part of the Affordable Care Act, CMS has a readmissions reduction program that lowers payments to hospitals with excessive readmissions, including HAIs. This information, the links to this information, is available in the notes section of this presentation, which you can download. As a result, U.S. hospitals are taking major steps to reduce and eliminate HAIs. More stringent disinfectant protocols have significantly reduced HAIs, as reported by the CDC, but the long-term goals are yet to be achieved. As you can see, the costs related to HAIs drive the cost of healthcare up in the U.S. $10 billion. Collaborating with the CDC, Medicare has concluded that 5 types of HAIs are preventable when proper disinfection and aseptic clinical protocols are followed. These infections are associated with commonly performed procedures and often involve a device and patient interaction. Even Clostridium difficile, for example, which can work on a hard surface for 5 months or longer, requires an interaction between a patient and a hard surface. Usually this patient is a weak patient who is critically ill. The healthcare industry is aggressively applying systematic disinfection and aseptic clinical protocols, attacking infectious pathogens in 2 ways. These 2 ways are environmental cleaning and aseptic protocols. It's important for medical device makers to understand that hospitals have made significant changes in how they behave to proactively attack and prevent HAIs. It is also important to remember that both of these lines of attack involve the use of aggressive disinfectants, which can attack the appearance, performance, and life cycle of many classes of medical devices. Let's look closer at each point of attack. Environmental disinfecting is especially important because organisms can live on dry surfaces from 2 hours to 46 months, depending on the pathogen. This table shows the survival rates of hospital pathogens, including the 2 most common superbugs on dry surfaces. Bleach does a great job of killing these microbes. Therefore, one of the major changes that hospitals have made in the past 5 years is widespread use of products containing bleach. All hard surfaces are wiped down with, and in some cases, soaked in bleach. Bleach leaves a residue which patients perceive as dirty. So a second product is often used to remove this residue. The end result is a shortened life cycle of surfaces on equipment. Many device housings experience environmental stress cracking and can prematurely fail. Because of clinical evidence, chlorhexidine isopropyl alcohol preparations now dominate the market, and wet IPA is pervasively wiped on the clinician's hands, on patient skin, and on devices that touch patient skin. Because of these practices, HAI rates for catheter-associated infections are falling significantly. However, today's medical devices, both disposable and reusable, are subject to higher levels of chemical attack from isopropyl alcohol, among many other agents. And we will address this list of active disinfecting agents later in this presentation. Disposable catheter hubs, connectors, Y-sites, all visibly crack, causing clinicians to doubt their safety and quality. Devices designed 5 or 10 years ago are experiencing performance and functional issues. This can be after just a few minutes of active use for disposables, or a few months in the case of a reusable monitor or portable imaging equipment. Because of this, device designers and manufacturers are looking for new materials that can perform better in this new use environment. As consumers, we're all familiar with the hazing and crazing that can result when molded plastic parts come in contact with even mild chemicals. Our sunglasses become cracked and brittle after repeated exposure to body oils and sunscreen, for example. Or our glassware becomes cloudy after a few times in the dishwasher. Today's medical devices must face even greater our medical devices today must face greater chemical attack from lipids, medical disinfectants, hospital cleansers, drugs, and carrier solvents. The bonding agents that are used during fabrication, adhesives that are used during fabrication, and plasticizers that dwell in connecting flexible PVC parts. The device also must face the stress of constant use and handling. Remember, when we talk about chemical resistance, we're talking about more than chemical compatibility. We're also talking about the stresses applied during fabrication and during everyday use. We'll look more closely at the fundamentals of chemical attack in the next section, and we'll see that the ideal polymer for medical devices would have all of these attributes listed here in order to function well in today's challenging use environment. I'll now turn to the technical details, and my colleague Ken Breeding will lead you through this section.
Thank you, Cynthia. Now we're going to transition over to, as she mentioned, a closer look at our information on what is chemical resistance, how is it measured, and what it looks like when you take some of these engineering resins that are currently used in the medical device market, how they compare on the same testing ones beside each other. So go on to the next slide, please. So fundamentals of chemical resistance, or in some cases known as chemical compatibility. We also know, we've heard already in this presentation about environmental stress cracking. Environmental stress cracking is the one thing we know that we recognize when a device, when you spend a lot of money and resources on developing a device and get it launched into the market space, the last thing you want to see is it fail due to environmental stress cracking. So a lot of times engineers for medical device OEMs have to do their own protocol testing to measure and see if the product can meet the fitness for use for the application. But any kind of chemical attack that occurs, it has to have not only just the material itself, you have to have stress applied, maybe through applied or residual, and you have to have the chemical itself. Next slide, please. Now, details of chemical resistance. Here's another slide we'll talk about. Chemical reactions between polymers and chemicals. There's a lot of things that go into play here. A lot of times it's a lot more difficult to explain, but when you think of a solvent itself or a chemical in contact with the plastic, sometimes it has to be the solubility characteristics of the solvent as well as the plastic and the stress. You take away any one component of this, you do not have this environmental stress cracking. But in most cases, when you think of plastics and medical devices, whether it's residual or applied, there are stresses in the polymer itself. And you do know, as we just pointed out, there are more aggressive chemicals now in the market that are now aggressively attacking a number of the engineering polymers that have been in the market for over 15 years. Next slide, please. Here's some examples. We have haze shown on the far left, you have spotting in the middle, and you have what we also have been talking about, stress cracking. Haze may be just a cloudy surface. Spotting may be where you might see some pits or pieces of the material that is dissolved, and then on stress cracking you see where the cracks are occurring on the surface, and that's where you have a complete catastrophic failure. Next page. There are factors that can affect chemical attack. Temperature, as you go up in temperature, the reactions can be more aggressive. Stress concentration of the material or the not sensitivity of the material can come into play. Fatigue it can also come into play on the design of the part, and the concentration and the exposure time, which is also known as the main primary catalyst for what causes environmental stress crack resistance. Next page. So what we've done at Eastman, we've been looking for a number of years at this issue as the market changed, and we've been focused on what can we do to measure our materials against other materials that are in this market and learn from this, and what is the main drivers is causing the chemical attack. Next slide, please. So predicting chemical resistance behavior. We've taken a current ASTM test, which is D543, which is for testing of chemical resistance. And what we've done, we've now recorded a lot of information on chemical compatibility or chemical resistance of our materials benchmarked against engineering polymers used in medical devices. There's an ANTEC paper that was presented last year in Orlando on chemical resistance, and there's one that goes back 2-3 years ago that was on residual stress. Both of these are related to some of the work that we've been doing internally at Eastman's technology labs to understand the chemical resistance behaviors of materials. Next slide, please. This is a busy slide, but I wanted to go into this a little bit so I help you explain what's going on. We have 4 different materials mounted on a plaque of material. So the upper left is the Triton MX711. To the right is a lipid-resistant polycarbonate with a melt flow rate of about 6. To the lower right is a medical acrylic. It's widely used in the med device market. And the lower left is a medical general purpose polycarbonate with a melt flow of about 15. Next slide, please. At this point, we're going to launch the video to show you a time-lapse photography of these parts, all exposed to the same disinfectant, and they all have the same applied stress. You can see the acrylic is the first one, the stress crack starting from the middle where the applied stress is. The general purpose polycarbonate is second. The upper right is the lipid resistant polycarbonate. You can see the edge crazies that are occurring and cracking. And now you're starting to see cracks form from the center where the applied stress is. And the Triton in the upper left-hand corner is not showing any chemical attack. All these were again exposed to Virex TB, a common disinfectant used in the hospitals. You can go back to the slides if you'd like. Okay, next slide. So what we've been doing is understanding when we work directly with medical device OEMs and the hospitals, we're trying to understand what are the typical disinfectants that they're currently using and why, and what is the active ingredients in each one of those common disinfectants. As you can see on this page here, a list on the far left, the active ingredients. We've already mentioned isopropyl alcohol, quaternary ammonium chlorides, phenolics, the iodine, alkalides, peroxides, hypochlorite, and chlorhexidine. These all are the different ones that we've run across in the last 4 to 5 years. The ones that are more aggressive are the ones that have the isopropyl and the chlorhexidine, gluconate, and phenolics. Phenolics probably are the most aggressive, what we've been seeing on all plastics. The Santa Claus are the ones that we run into the most with most of the device companies we're working with, and they have the quaternary ammonium chloride along with isopropyl. So we're going to move into some data that Eastman has generated, as well as comparing with other materials, as well as working with the ASTM standards we talked about earlier. Next slide, please. So here's how we measure our chemical resistance or chemical compatibility. We take a strain gauge, we place molded plastic samples on there, we put a patch on there and soak the patch with the disinfectant. We allow it to sit for 24 hours at room temperature, and then we do a backside impact test to measure if it became ductile or brittle based on any kind of environmental stress cracking that may have occurred. Next slide. So here's some data showing the Eastman Triton copolyesters. There's a standard flow of MX711, our standard grade. We have the high flow grade, MX731. The chemical compatibility or chemical resistance of those two materials against some of these common disinfectants is holding up very well. You look at high flow polycarbonate or a standard flow polycarbonate or even the lip resistant polycarbonate, you're seeing chemical attack based on some of the active ingredients in these disinfectants. The other one is the impact modified styrene in the lower part, and it also shows chemical resistance attack against mostly isopropyl alcohol and iodine. Next slide, please. Continuing to look at chemical resistance with some of these common disinfectant cleaners. The one that we show here, the ones that show the most aggressive attack is the phenolics. But again, if you look at the ones that we were talking about earlier, the benzoyl quatermonias, the isopropyls, Triton holds up very well. The polycarbonate materials, all three grades, the standard flow, the high flow, and the lip resistant, all are cracking and failing. When it says broke on a jig, that means basically under the stress that was applied and the solvent that it broke and was no sample left to do testing or measure any data afterwards. Next slide. The other grade that we haven't talked yet is the MXF121. That's another family of Triton products, but it's for the flame retardant applications, typically medical electronic devices. That material in itself is based on Triton copolyester polymer. The materials that are incumbent materials that are typically in this market are PCABS. There's other grades of polycarbonate with polyester alloys that are also in this market. But what we're trying to demonstrate here is Triton MXF121 has performance that is superior to the common incumbent materials, the PCABS, that you'll find in these applications. These would be the skins or the outside enclosures of pump housings and drug delivery systems that have a catheter system hooked up to it. It could be a diagnostic system. There's a lot of different types of applications out there, so a number of these are now failing simply because the polycarbonate ABS blend is not able to withstand the current chemical attack that's going on in the environment. Next slide, please. So chemical resistance summary. We recognize that residual stress is one of the drivers to causing chemical attack. Triton copolyester has lower residual stress. It's related to the modulus and the glass transition temperature, the longer cooling window. Polycarbonate always has a higher modulus and higher residual stress. And typically most molders that run polycarbonate recognize you either have to slow down the process and use a hotter mold, which would decrease the cycle time, or you have to do secondary annealing to help reduce some of that stress. Toughness, when you think of ductility or impact strength, Triton copolyester is very tough, just like polycarbonate. Most of the other engineering polymers that are in the market, like acrylics and styrenics, are not necessarily what we consider tough. When you look at chemical compatibility under stress, basically a sample that does not stress crack or craze and therefore maintains its mechanical performance. You look at the copolyesters in general, they do a very good job in this market environment. Polycarbonate does have clear effect on chemical incompatibility. In other words, it will environmental stress crack very easily when exposed to common disinfectants in the hospital, as well as the drug carrier solvents that are used in oncology chemotherapy drugs. Same thing for the impact modified styrenics. Overall chemical resistance or chemical compatibility, the copolyesters are very high, particularly Triton. Polycarbonate would be considered medium at best, and the styrenics are considered very low. Next slide, please. Common secondary operations also can come into play on chemical resistance or chemical attack. Solvent bonding is one of those. When you think of bonding a rigid connector lure, like a male-female connector or stopcock, to flexible tubing, it could be PVC or urethane typically. You can typically use adhesives or solvent bonding. The solvent itself, typically one of the more common ones is called cyclohexanone, can be very aggressive towards some of these engineering plastics. In the case of the Triton copolyester, there's not a chemical attack per se, but you do get really good high bond strengths with the tubing and the rigid material. So that typically means you have a much better device. You don't have to worry about the pull strength of the lure being pulled off the tube. You will get tubing failure before you get bond failure. There's a lot of UV adhesives in the market space. We've been working closely with Hinkle and Dymex, are the main leaders in adhesives, and there's a lot of data that Eastman is generating today that we could share through our technology organization to support any program you might have. Same goes for ultrasonic welding. There's a lot of work that's been done on Eastman's durable side and the medical side, looking at ultrasonic welding of resins and looking at how copolyesters weld compared to other materials. Again, the technology organization is a great resource for that information. We also have done a lot of work on laser welding and laser marking. This is, again, a common area that we recognize in a number of medical devices, particularly when it comes to laser marking when you're putting coating on the device. This is something that we can share as well through our technology organization. And the second or last thing I want to mention is the thermoplastic elastomer overmolding. A lot of these devices sometimes have soft touch or soft feel additives put on the surface of the rigid part, and that's to help improve patient comfort and safety. There's a number of TPs that we've worked with out there in the market. Again, technology organization is a great resource at Eastman that we can share that information with you when you're looking at our materials in a medical device. Next slide, please. Sterilization, commonly gamma or E-beam is the common, some of the two are the major sterilization methods used in medical devices. One of the key things to point out here is a lot of materials have been used for a long time, and the medical device market has been living with what we recognize as a color shift. Basically, you mold a part or make a device. It may be a clear part or it may be a slightly colored part. But if you do sterilization, you do see some shift in the natural color that you did as molded. In the case of the copolyester, in this case the Triton family, you see very minimal color shift after sterilization, and it recovers very quickly to close to the natural that you just molded. So that means you have a product now that you can control. If you have a device that you need to have it in a transparent or opaque color, it will now maintain that color after sterilization, where before you were having to live with a shift in color. Next slide, please. So in summary, there are several tests that Eastman has done to perform chemical resistance. We have this information that we keep to share with our customers, and we share it typically in a way that it helps them make good choice or sound decisions about material selection when they were looking with medical devices and they're trying to look at the downstream environment that the device will be exposed to within the time of its life. We have looked at the polymers and the chemicals. We have looked at the stress and the time and the temperature that these are all exposed. We've been trying to look at actual fitness for use requirements in these applications and trying to correlate what we're doing with in an accelerated version of what can actually happen in that environment. And our Triton copolyester has been shown that it's got the best combination of chemical compatibility, physical properties to be used in medical applications. So at this time, I think this is the last slide, is it? We can probably start working into the opening up at the question section.
Thanks, Ken. All right, some of you have published your questions. And let's see, let's start off with, in which applications are you seeing this polymer being used?
You want me to answer that?
Yeah, yes, Ken.
There are a number of applications, anything from blood applications to chemotherapy drug delivery systems to syringes to opaque housings on diagnostic equipment, ultrasound equipment. There's a lot of different applications, but the only thing that I can say we're not in is long-term implantables. So things that are typically 28 days or less, you can think of a device from a stopcock to a manifold to a male-female connectors. We're basically in all those.
A question from one of our attendees: was Sterad and Steris usage evaluated?
The answer is yes. We tested the low temperature hydrogen peroxide plasma sterilization with all the materials, including Trident copolyesters. Our Eastman copolyesters has very good physical property retention in terms of modulus, optical clarity, and also the chemical compatibility.
Have you tested this resin for reusable sterilization like autoclave, hydrogen peroxide sterilization? We just answered that question. Okay, the autoclave.
Yeah, overall, no, Eastman copolyesters, those material has a TG, are not suitable for autoclave. So we never tested our material, after the steam sterilization.
I mean, to help also expand on that is to think of it, if you're using a single-use disposable device and you do not want the hospital to reuse it, our Triton materials or our copolyesters will not be able to pass an autoclave test. So you'll get deformation. Next question.
The next question is the FR Triton grade referenced halogenated or non-halogenated effective? Ken, I think you can take that one.
Yeah, I'll take that one. It's non-halogenated. We were working with a company that was going to be launching a product in North America and in Europe. And in the European market, they wanted to be non-halogenated. Over in the North American side, it didn't seem to matter. But it is non-halogenated.
Does Eastman have a notification of change policy?
Yes, we do. All the Eastman copolyesters, the medical grade ISO 10993 certified, and we offer the notice of change notification to the customer.
The answer to the question is yes.
We have a question regarding, they point out that most of this data was based on Triton, and they'd like to know more about how the Tenite family performs in comparison. We'll have to take that question offline, and we do have this. Make sure that you put your email address into the form, and we can get back to you specifically on this.
And I can have a little comment on this. We do test it, the Tenites with the same, testing protocol. So overall, Tenite has a pretty good, chemical resistance in terms of their disinfectant, oncology drug carrier solvent, and also oncology drug. And we can provide more information, if you give us their contact.
And these questions are pouring in. Roughly, the cost of these chemical resistant, this customer is asking what the rough cost estimate is comparing the Triton family to PCABS. Ken?
From the cost perspective, it's very similar. I mean, typically in these applications, depends on, basically the volume. And the one way I want to point this out is the applications that Eastman is currently running in their Triton MXF 121 were originally tooled. The molds were built for PCABS, and they were going to launch it in PCABS, but they went to the Triton MXF 121 for the reasons that they needed to go there. So combination of chemical resistance or compatibility was one of those. So cost differences are not that different. I mean, I think at this stage I can't comment much on price because I typically have to know more about the opportunity, and I can talk about that then. So if there's anyone that's interested in learning more about the PCABS alternatives, just send us an email and let us know who we are, and we can definitely work out and talk with you about that.
Okay, is the FR grade also tested to ISO 10993?
The answer is yes.
Yes.
Okay, and what biocompatibility testing has been carried out? Definitely the ISO 10993.
We've
Anything
done
else?
testing. We've done testing, minimal testing, typically for a Class 1 device. So we've done skin sensitations and things like that, but we didn't do full implantables.
Yeah, this is for the MXF, 121, but for the regular Triton, Triton family 711, 731, we have a full, biocompatibility test, like, skin sensitization, a Clickman test, maximization test. Yeah, we have the full test.
Correct.
Are these resins readily available in China? The answer to that is yes.
Yes.
What is the melt flow of MX711?
The melt flow of 711 is around like 9, comparing to, we have a high flow version, MX731, which is about 16 to 18, depends on the, the temperature and pressure.
Yeah, they're very comparable to a lipid-resistant polycarbonate and a high-flow polycarbonate, pretty close on viscosity.
Do PETG or PET have similar environmental stress cracking resilience as Triton?
So overall, Triton is outperformance the chemical compatibility, comparing to other material like PETG and PET. PETG overall, also has a better compatibility comparing to polycarbonate. So the key issue here is, those material, they have a inherently lower molding stress in the parts comparing to polycarbonate or polycarbonate ABS alloy. So this, overall, PETG has a, better chemical resistance comparing to polycarbonate.
But yeah, like as you pointed out, Triton is still superior over PETG.
Okay, is the material FDA approved to be used in medical applications?
The answer is yes.
And do you have ISO 103485?
For this one, I'm not that familiar with this in ISO 1034. So if you send us more information, we may follow up with this.
What about the stress cracking resistance to fuels and hydrocarbons?
Overall, it really depends on the application, but we do, had some in-house testing, using the immersion test. We submerged copolyester, the sample, in the hydrocarbons such as gasoline, the fuel, the oil, the heptane, hexane, those type of, short chain hydrocarbon. We do not see the, distinctive, the volume change or weight change or color appearance change. So overall, for the short period of time, we should have pretty good, chemical compatibility. But in the long run, it's not recommended for the long-term storage or contact with those kind of chemicals.
Do vapor environments rather than liquid solutions present longer-term risks? How can these be addressed?
This is a good question. We do have some kind of customer trying to asking us about some chemical compatibility in terms of the gas. For example, like the aesthetic drugs. Those are all like a hydrofluorocarbon. And as you see today's presentation, all our testing is based on the liquid chemicals has direct contact, and we do not have like validated testing protocol for the gas but overall, when you are evaluating your material, the performance or product performance, basically you can set up, based on each application, set up your own acceptance criteria, such as the optical clarity change, or maybe, before and after the exposure at a certain temperature and pressure, and you measure, the physical property, the change before and after, and you can, set up your own testing, like acceptance criteria. We answer this kind of question to our customer. So basically give the recommendation, so hopefully they can borrow the principle of our existing testing protocol to apply to their own, testing method.
We have another question that is about processing. One of the participants said that they've been working with Triton TX151HF, and they found that it's been a little difficult to process. They would prefer not to use mold release agents. And so they'd like to know more about the performance of these materials in that environment. Ken, would you like to address that?
Well, I mean, again, it would be something that we have technical resources, particularly field tech service reps that are good about understanding the mold process, the mold conditions, the tool design, to better understand what's going on in your application with TX1501. We do have medical grades that are with and without mold release, but any kind of injection molding application we typically recommend running with a mold release additive. But there are some cases where they're not. And again, it goes back to the mold design. So that's where we have expertise, and we have people that are willing to openly share that information if you would allow to work with us on this, on an opportunity or a project. So if you do show interest in our MX grades, which are medical grades, and you want to meet with us, please let us know through contacting us, and we'll be definitely set up a face-to-face meeting with you and have this discussion further.
What is the transparency percentage for display applications?
As you know, Triton copolyester has an excellent optical clarity. It has very low haze and very high transmittance. It's over, in the visible range, it's over 90%.
What is the mechanism by which environmental stress cracking occurs, and what happens on the molecular level?
This is a good one. So as you see from the slide, it also mentioned, the take-home message for the environmental stress cracking. So basically, for the chemical has direct contact with the materials, this, it takes energy to break down the polymers, So basically, there's no chemical reaction happens between chemicals and the molecules. So the mechanism for the toluene to form the cracking is more like viscoelastic behavior. For the material, the polymer chain, they have a entanglement to each other during the injection molding process. But with the temperature, with the chemical and stress applied to the material, so polymer chain is more like going through the disentanglement process. So when the polymer chain under the stress, with the help of the chemical exposure, and then the polymer chain will slide against each other, they will generate some kind of the void between the polymer chain, and then with time goes on, with the help of the chemicals and stress, the micro void will become the cracks, and cracks will propagate, grows bigger to form the crack. So that's pretty much how the parts crack, go through the environmental stress cracking, in the molecular level like this.
Okay. Is the shrinkage of Triton comparable to polycarbonate, and can Triton be molded in the existing PC mold?
The answer to the question is the shrink rates are basically the same. And to answer the question about molding in existing polycarbonate molds, that can be a yes-no question. In most cases, The process can be adjusted, and it will probably run in the existing mold. It may not work at the same cycle time. That may be based on the features of the design. There might be some tweaks in the mold that may be required to make it more process friendly for the Triton material. But actually it does, in a lot of cases, it does work just fine in existing polycarbonate molds. But again, it's a case-by-case basis.
What about the operating temperatures? Is the dimensional stability of your product guaranteed at a temperature range of about minus 20 Celsius to about plus 50 Celsius?
You want to answer that, Yubi? I don't mean to.
That's centigrade, sorry.
Yeah, I figured the centigrade, yeah. It's got good impact strength at below zero. There's been some testing that we've done with some packaging applications that shows good toughness at low temperature, and it certainly has good toughness at 50 C. But if you want to comment any more about that, UBL.
Yeah, actually, the Triton copper esters has a very excellent, low temperature toughness property. We got customer, they use this material, even down to the liquid nitrogen temperature, still keeps the good toughness without showing the brittle failure. So definitely, Triton for low temperature, it's very suitable for that kind of application.
Yes.
What precautions need to be taken during ultrasonic welding to avoid environmental stress cracking?
You see the Triton copper ester is suitable for the ultrasonic welding, and definitely when you are pick up the suitable parameter for the welding process, using the appropriate pressure and welding time, the force, speed, trying to minimize the welding stress in the parts. If you do it like a more aggressive way to introduce like residual stress into the welding joint parts, it's always the weakest link for the parts, and then when they are exposed to the chemicals, you may have some problem in the future. So definitely be aware of that, trying to minimize the welding stress.
Can annealing disfigure your parts?
It depends on your annealing.
Yeah, typically your annealing temperature is below the glass resistant temperature of the polymer.
Yeah, and overall, as we said, the polycarbonate has a high stress. They need annealing after the product is made. For Triton, for Eastman copolyester, the family, we have a low, molding stress in it. So overall, we don't need annealing, for the secondary, process.
Yeah, I don't see that you don't get any benefits by annealing Triton like you would in polycarbonate. So it's not really something that we run across that often.
Are there 9,4V0 grades available?
Not commercially for Eastman.
Not at the moment. What precautions need to be taken during laser marking to avoid environmental stress cracking?
As we said, Triton copolyester can be laser marked without any additive in it, not like many other technique, or other material. They need additional laser absorber, to give the good contrast. We have some, success story, using Triton with laser marking. But in terms of the environmental stress cracking, we have limited knowledge at this point. But overall, it should be, I would say, the chemical compatibility, for the laser marked parts, if they are only, made it on the surface of the parts, we will not see any distinctive differences. I would say maybe the chemical compatibility should be still the same.
Does the range of disinfectants currently represent the global marketplace or just the U.S.?
This is more like, the overall study, we go through the CDC reports, and even I think this is more like related to the global market, and maybe in different region, some of the medical disinfectant or chemicals is not available in that area. So the customer, they have to just like be careful, be cautious about what kind of chemical has potential contact with the product, and then be actively looking for the active ingredient, to be aware the potential risk of the material selection when they're exposed to those chemicals.
Is there a possibility of in-mold labeling?
Yes, the answer is yes.
It's already been done.
These slides. Yes. I'm sorry, Ken, I interrupted you.
I was going to say it's already being done commercially, so that's just kind of lets people know that.
Can Triton be coated with
Siloxane.
siloxane hard coating? Any feel for adhesion of coating to Triton?
Yes, the answer is yes. We do have several success stories about Triton coated with the different type of hard coating. Overall, the Triton and has similar hardness compared to polycarbonate, but they are not as good as acrylic. So we do have customers that are looking for improved scratch resistance. So we tested several type of hard coating. It works very well, without sacrificing the toughness, and also the same keep the same optical clarity, and also definitely improve the hardness of the surfaces.
Any other questions?
Have you performed any environmental creep testing as opposed to constant strain testing? Reverse impact testing published? Is this data available?
Environmental creep testing. This is a good one. Actually, as we said, we presented the reverse side impact testing results. There's a ongoing project right now doing the creep testing, opposed to the at a given temperature and humidity. And as you know, this takes a much longer time for us to get the complete the report. We can follow up with that.
Yeah, about the only thing we have right now is under ASTM, the creep module is done at different loadings.
Yeah, there are several people who need to contact us to follow up with the presenters on potential applications.
Okay.
Yeah, we do have your contact information as you signed up today, and we will follow up on any questions we could not answer or need to discuss further. Yeah, I think we're out of time. There have been so many questions pouring in here. But we will get back to each of the respondents. We do have your contact and information. And in closing, we'd like you will be able to download this presentation. Several people have asked that question. And if you need more information, just reach out, especially to Ken. And we really appreciate the time that you took to spend this time with us today.
Perfect, Cynthia, and a big thank you to our other two presenters, Dr. Liao and Kenneth. A big thank you to everybody at Eastman for a really great and informative presentation. As Cynthia did say, we will be sending you guys a copy of these slides and a download link for those, as well as a recorded copy of the webinar, so you can also share those with others at your company, and then watch that again at your own on your leisure. So again, a big thank you for everybody for attending, and have a great rest of the day.